Here's the story about an ibex hunting trip, a steep mountainside and a juniper bush. Hear how I made a fool of myself in front of 2 hunting guides and get 3 universal lessons that you can apply to any hunting situation and avoid making the same mistakes I made. Welcome to the Red Kettle channel. This is where you get tips and tricks for efficient hunting. In this video you'll hear about the juniper bush incident in Kazakhstan, and we'll review route courses, lessons learned and what you can do to avoid getting in the same situation. Once I hunted ibex in Kazakhstan. It was a fantastic experience, but I learned a few hunting lessons the hard way. I travelled far and paid a fair amount of money, so returning without my ibex was not an option. I was an experienced hunter at the time, but I faced one of the red flags of hunting. A new type of hunt. If you ever hunted abroad or away from your regular ground, you know it can feel like moving a couple of steps down the learning curve. You don't have a complete picture of how you'll hunt, and if you don't zoom in on the critical details, proper planning and preparation can be challenging. Most guides are first-class hunters, but they take things for granted. This means you're constantly playing catch-up to figure out what's going on, and language barriers don't help. That's a problem because there's a limit to how many things you can process simultaneously. This issue doesn't just apply to hunting abroad, it kicks in every time you introduce something new. There are ways to avoid that, which I'll get to later in the video. And by the way, check out this video if you want to know more of those limits and what you can do about them. Back to Kazakhstan. So there was, not sufficiently prepared, working hard to read the situation. Our hunting ground was one of many mountain plateaus. Each morning we'd set off on our ponies, moving to the edge of the plateau, finding a spur where we'd glass for ibex. Once we found a group, we'd use the spotting scope to confirm if it contained mature animals and to scout a route. One morning we found a group and a route, and I was suddenly stalking carefully down one spur to shoot an ibex across a draw on another spur. Ibex have a nasty habit of being alert. On top of that, they have excellent eyesight, so there's a limit to how close we could get. We were out in the open. Suddenly, at a steep point on the slope, my guides stopped by a juniper bush that offered some concealment and gesticulated to explain that this was as good as it got. I'd equipped my rifle with a bipod, which was pretty high-tech at the time, which tells you how long time ago it was. But high-tech or not, they were useless on the steep slope. Ironically, my rifle also wore a lovely 1907 style shooting sling from Turner Saddlery. I bought it because I loved the thick leather and it seemed like a solid piece of kit. But I hadn't practiced shooting it. It does make sense, but I think that skill just wasn't on my radar at the time. On that mountain slope, I should have gotten into a sitting position, looped up in a rock solid shooting position, but I didn't. No, that would have been the right thing to do. Instead, I started what must have seemed like the craziest performance the 2 guys had ever seen in the mountains. Slapstick comedy doesn't require many ingredients. All I needed was a juniper bush, a setting sun and a shemak scarf. Here's my logic at the time. The setting sun was hitting my eyes and my scope, which made it difficult for me to see the ibex properly, and the glare made it more likely that I would signal my presence to them. So I draped my shemak over my head and scope. To the guides I probably looked like some sort of crazy wet plate photographer from the 1850s. Looking like a fool wasn't my biggest issue. Turns out that a juniper bush isn't the most stable shooting platform. I'd probably have gotten more stable if I'd shot sitting, even without the sling. But that didn't really matter, because eventually the ibex figured out something was amiss. And they decided that even though I appeared fairly incompetent, I still carried a 300 Winchester Magnum and presented some level of risk. It was enough to make them leave. Do you know that feeling when you miss an opportunity to shoot? When you had the perfect opportunity, but you messed it up. It made me feel like a fool in front of the 2 guides. I can't remember how far into the hunt we were, but the pressure to get an ibex shot up exponentially. Will I get another opportunity? The trip wasn't a total disaster, but it was a steep learning curve. Fortunately, I quickly picked up the pace and got squared away. More on that another time. What's more important now are the lessons you can learn. Let me be clear, I was an experienced hunter at the time, and a good shot from the positions I'd practiced at home. So how could I end up in a situation like the juniper bush incident? Let's do some root cause analysis, see if you agree with me. and then I'll share what I do these days to avoid this kind of situation, what you can do too. Firstly, I had not accounted for uphill and downhill shooting scenarios when preparing. Secondly, I didn't have a good enough repertoire of standard shooting positions like the sitting. And thirdly, I brought gear, a shooting sling, that could have helped me, but I hadn't taken time to embed it into my standard operating procedures. Well, I wasn't even at a level where I would attempt to use that sling. These days I use the efficient hunting framework when hunting. It's a step-by-step approach to planning, preparing and executing any hunt or any season. When planning, you're guided by 7 questions. And the very first question is, what's the situation? It doesn't matter if you're building a house, building an IT system or planning a hunt. You need to know your requirements, the scenario you're preparing for. If I had that framework then, I would have understood the implications of terrain, including the need for uphill and downhill shooting. And I would have brought a tripod or short set of sticks to help me make a horizontal shot of a slope. Heck, I might even have gotten familiar with the sling. I feel like a fool even thinking about it now, so let's move on. Just promise me you won't make the same mistakes. The core of the efficient hunting framework is a 6-phase hunting process, and each phase comes with a specific set of checks or standard operating procedures. The setup phase includes establishing a good shooting position, and it means being well versed in the essential shooting positions ranging from prone to sitting and kneeling positions, finishing off with offhand shooting. Here's my general take on it. If you hunt with a rifle, you must also meet the standards for being a rifleman, which means a broad and foundational repertoire. At the time, I only practiced off a bench, off shooting sticks and prone off bipods. And hand on heart, most of the time was on the bench, then a little bit of the bipods and hardly any practice of my shooting sticks. The total opposite of what I should have done for my general needs at home. Anyway, if I mastered the standard shooting positions, I wouldn't have clung to the juniper bush, frantically trying to get stable. I would have leaned back in a sitting position and taken the shot. Side note, the standard in standard operating procedures means the way you do things, but it's also a good reminder to set standards, which means being clear about how well and how fast you do something. Sometimes you have all the time in the world, but practicing to perform a task or action faster usually reveals area for improvement in your execution. And occasionally you have limited time to act, and then it pays off to be fast. Anyway, let's move on. One of the benefits of the efficient hunting framework is consistency. When it comes to gear, I like to use the comparison tools versus toys. On that hunt, the shooting sling, or at least the shooting sling feature, was a toy because I didn't know how to use it. Questions 3 to 5 in the framework are, what gear do you need? How will you carry it and how will you use it? Those questions and answers tie back to the situation summary, your strategy, your tactics, and your standard operating procedures. If I'd applied the framework, I would have known how to sling up and taken the shot confidently. It doesn't really matter where you hunt or how seasoned you are. Without the proper preparation, checks and procedures, it's easy to get in trouble, especially when introducing something new. But it doesn't have to be that way. I created several efficient hunting resources for you, and I'll keep adding hunting stories so you can avoid making the same mistakes as me. Check out this playlist for more hunting stories and lessons, or check out the free resources in the efficient hunting framework, including the free quick reference guide for standard operating procedures for the hunting process. Thanks for watching.